Hello, welcome to another lesson. In this lesson, I'll be introducing Metasploit Framework. We are going to learn what it is, understand exploits versus payloads, explore Metasploit's workflow, and know when to use it responsibly. Now let's dive in. Let's start with the definition. What is Metasploit? Metasploit is the world's most widely used penetration testing framework. It was created by H.D. Moore in 2003 and is now owned by Rapid7. It is completely open source and free to use. Metasploit comes pre-installed on Kali Linux, making it immediately available for penetration testers, and the framework contains thousands of pre-built exploits and tools. Let's now consider what it does. So what does Metasploit do? It exploits vulnerabilities in systems and applications. It automates complex exploitation tasks that would take hours to code manually. It provides post-exploitation capabilities to maintain access and gather information. And it is the industry standard used by professional penetration testers worldwide. Metasploit comes in two versions. The first one is the free open source version, and that is what we are going to use in our subsequent lesson. And the second one is the Metasploit Pro, which is the commercial version with a graphical interface and additional automation features. For learning and most professional work, the free version is all you need. I want us to understand these three critical concepts: exploits, payloads, and modules. These terms get confused, but they are distinct. What is an exploit? An exploit is a code that takes advantage of a vulnerability. It is how you get initial access to target system. For example, exploit /windows /smb /ms17 underscore 010 underscore eternal blue exploits the eternal blue vulnerability in Windows SMB. Now let's consider payload. A payload is the code that runs after the exploit succeeds. It is what you want to accomplish on the target. For example, Windows /Meterpreter /reverse underscore TCP is a payload that gives you a Meterpreter shell with a reverse connection back to your machine. And the next one is the module. A module is any piece of code in Metasploit. This includes exploit payloads, scanners, and auxiliary tools. I also want to add that everything in Metasploit is a module. Here is a helpful analogy. The exploit is just like the key that unlocks the door. The payload is what you carry through the door once it is opened, and a module is any tool in your Metasploit toolbox. Metasploit organizes everything into 6 module categories. Let's consider them. The first one are the exploits, and these take advantage of vulnerabilities to gain access to systems. The second one are the payloads, and these are the code executed after successful exploitation. Common payloads include reverse shells, bind shells, and Meterpreter. The third one is the auxiliary modules, and these are scanners, fuzzers, and denial of service tools. They don't exploit anything, they just gather information or test systems. The fourth one is post-exploitation modules, and these run after you've already compromised a system. They handle privilege escalation, data collection, and persistence. The fifth one are the encoders, and these obfuscate payloads to evade antivirus and intrusion detection systems. The sixth one are the NOPs, which stands for No Operation Instructions, and they are used for buffer alignment in certain exploits. Understanding these 6 categories helps you navigate Metasploit's thousands of modules. Let's talk about Meterpreter, which is the Metasploit's most powerful payload. Meterpreter stands for Meta Interpreter. So why is Meterpreter special? Meterpreter is special for several reasons, and some of them are: it runs entirely in memory with no files written to disk, and this makes it much harder to detect. Also, the communication between you and the target is encrypted. It is significantly harder for antivirus to detect, and it is extensible, meaning you can load additional features as needed. Let's now consider the capabilities. What can Meterpreter do? It provides complete file system access and manipulation. It can capture screenshots and even webcam images. It includes keylogging to capture what users type. It can dump passwords from memory. It enables network pivoting to attack other systems from the compromised host, and it has built-in privilege escalation capabilities. Meterpreter is the most used payload in professional penetration testing. When you see Metasploit demos or read about real-world penetration tests, Meterpreter is almost always the payload of choice. It is powerful, reliable, and feature-rich. Now, let me walk you through the typical Metasploit workflow step by step. The first step is the reconnaissance, and this is where you identify target systems and gather information about what services they are running. The second step is scanning, and this is where you use Metasploit's auxiliary modules to scan for open ports, enumerate services, and identify software versions. The third step is gaining access, and this is the exploitation phase. Here, you select an appropriate exploit for the vulnerability you found, you choose a payload, usually Meterpreter, you configure the required options like rhost to the target IP, lhost to your IP, and lport to your listening ports. Then you execute the exploit. Step 4 is post-exploitation, and this means once you've had access, you can escalate privileges if needed. You maintain access by creating persistent mechanisms, and you pivot to other systems on the network. And the last one is cleanup, and here you remove any artifacts or backdoors you created. You cover your tracks by cleaning logs, and you exit cleanly without crashing the system. And I want you to know that this workflow applies to most penetration testing engagements. Before using Metasploit, you need to know these essential terms. The first one is the R host, and this stands for remote host. This is the target IP address you are attacking. The second one is the L host, and this stands for local host. This is your attacker IP address, that is where you want the target to connect back to. The third one is the R port, and this is the remote port. This is the vulnerable service port on the target system. The next one is the L port, and L port is the local port, and this is the port you are listening on for reverse connections from the payload. The next one is the session, and a session is an active connection to a compromised system, and this means once your exploit succeeds, you get a session. The next one is the handler, and a handler manages incoming payload connections. It receives the connection from your payload. The next one is a listener, and a listener waits for connections from the target. It is returning on your L host and L port. The last one here is the shellcode, and a shellcode is the low-level executable code that makes up your payload. Understanding these terms is absolutely critical for using Metasploit effectively. You are going to see them constantly in every exploit you run. There are three main ways to use Metasploit, and the first one is MSF console, that is the command line interface. And this is the most powerful and flexible way to use Metasploit. It is what the professionals use because it gives full access to all features. And for our subsequent lessons, we are going to be using MSF console. The second one is the MSF Venom, and this is a standalone payload generator. It creates executable files containing your payload. It is useful when you need to generate a malicious file rather than exploit directly. MSF Venom replaced the older MSF payload and MSF encode tools. The last one is the Armitage, and this is the graphical user interface for Metasploit, which is the GUI. And what does it do? It provides a visual representation of networks and point-and-click exploitation. It is good for learning and visualizing attacks, but it is less powerful than MSF console. And what is the best practice? I would recommend that you learn MSF console first. The command line gives you maximum control and understanding. Once you master MSF console, you can use the GUI tools if you want, but you always know what's happening under the hood. Now let's talk about when you can and cannot use Metasploit. This is extremely important. Let's consider the appropriate use cases first. You can appropriately use Metasploit for authorized penetration testing with written permission. You can test your own systems and lab environments. You can conduct security assessments when you have explicit client approval. You can use it in CTF competitions and practice environments. And you can use it for vulnerability research in controlled settings. Now let's consider when you should never use Metasploit, or what you should never use Metasploit for. You should never use Metasploit on systems you don't own without authorization. Never use it for any illegal activities or unauthorized access. Never test production systems without proper approval and change management, and never use it to cause damage or harm. And here is the critical requirement. Always get written authorization before testing. The scope and boundaries must be clearly defined. You need to understand the legal implications in your jurisdiction. Penetration testing without permission is a crime in most countries. you can face serious criminal charges and civil liability. And I want you to know that just because you can exploit a system doesn't mean you should. Authorization is everything. Now let's cover some professional usage tips and best practices for Metasploit. Before you exploit anything, verify that reason authorization exists and is current. Test your exploits in your lab environment first. Understand exactly what each exploit does before using it, because some exploits can crash systems or cause data loss. Please know the risks. And during testing, document everything. Take screenshots of successful exploits, save command outputs and timestamps, and keep detailed notes of what you find. This documentation becomes your penetration test report. You can use Metasploit database to track your work. It stores hosts, services, credentials, and sessions automatically. And after exploitation, clean up all artifacts and backdoors you created. Remove any persistence mechanisms you installed. Provide detailed reports and evidence and screenshots, and secure your findings because they contain sensitive information about vulnerabilities. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Metasploit can compromise systems in seconds, so use it ethically, legally, and professionally. A good tester leaves systems better than they found them. Let's now summarize what we've learned in this lesson about the Metasploit framework. We've seen that Metasploit is the industry standard exploitation framework used by professionals worldwide. Exploits gain access to vulnerabilities, and payloads define what happens after that access. Meterpreter runs in memory, encrypts communications, and is the most powerful payload available. We have 6 modules: exploits, payloads, auxiliaries, posts, encoder, and NOPs. We also consider some key terms such as R-host, which is the target, L-host, which is you, R-port, which is their port, and L-port, which is your listener. We looked at the workflow as well, from reconnaissance to scanning to gaining access to post-exploitation and to cleanup. We also consider the most powerful interface, which is the MSF console, and I mentioned that you should learn this first for full control. This is very important. Always have rating authorization before using Metasploit on any system. That's all for this lesson, but before we go, I have a challenge question for you, and the question is, what is the difference between an exploit and a payload? I'll be waiting in the comment section to get your response. Thank you so much. If you're here to subscribe to our YouTube channel, please do that now. Also, do not forget to like, comment, and share. So at this point, I can say see you in another lesson. Bye.